The dust-laden wind swept through Moab, Utah, carrying with it the whispers and judgments that followed Katherine Montgomery as she struggled to push her husband's funeral wagon off the main street. At 35 years of age, Katherine found herself suddenly alone in a town that had once welcomed her and her husband with open arms, but now only offered cold stares and turned backs. The death of her husband, Samuel, had left her not only heartbroken but also destitute, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a body that the townsfolk deemed too large to be of any use. "We ain't got no work for someone like you," Mr. Peterson, the general store owner, had said that morning, his eyes darting to her ample figure with undisguised disdain. "You'd eat more than you'd earn." Katherine had fought back tears as she'd left the store, her fifth rejection that day. Samuel had been gone 3 weeks, taken by a sudden fever that swept through the southeastern part of Utah Territory in the late summer of 1879. They'd only been in Moab for 6 months, having moved from back east where Katherine's family had disowned her for marrying a man they considered beneath her station. Now she pushed the small wagon containing what remained of their possessions away from the town center, her breath coming in heavy gasps. The August heat was merciless, bearing down on her like a physical weight. Her mourning dress, black and heavy, clung to her damp skin, and her dark hair, usually carefully pinned, had come loose, sticking to her face and neck. "Where you headed, madam?" A deep voice called, startling her. Katherine looked up to see a man on horseback, silhouetted against the setting sun. He was tall, even seated on his horse, with broad shoulders and a well-worn hat pulled low over his eyes. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice cracking. "Away from here." The man dismounted, and Katherine got a better look at him. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his late 30s, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the sun. His eyes were kind, though, a startling blue against his tanned skin. "Yates Zimmerman," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "I've got a ranch about 5 miles east of town." Katherine hesitated before taking his hand. Katherine Montgomery, widow of Samuel Montgomery. Recognition flickered across Yates's face. "I heard about your husband. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Montgomery." Katherine nodded, unable to speak past the sudden lump in her throat. "If you don't mind me asking, why are you leaving town with all your belongings?" Yates asked, gesturing to the small wagon. Katherine's cheeks burned with shame, but she lifted her chin. "No one will hire me. They say I'm unsuitable for work." Yates's brow furrowed. "Unsuitable? What kind of nonsense is that? They say I'm too." Katherine gestured vaguely to her body, unable to say the word. Understanding dawned in Yates's eyes, followed quickly by anger. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard," he said firmly. "Everyone deserves a fair chance." He glanced at the wagon, then back at Katherine. "I could use some help at my ranch. My housekeeper left last month to get married, and I've been managing on my own, but it's not going well. I've got a small cabin on the property where she used to stay. It's yours if you want it, along with fair wages for your work." Katherine stared at him, disbelief warring with hope. "You're offering me a job just like that?" Yates shrugged. "I need help, you need work. Seems simple enough to me." For the first time in weeks, Katherine felt something other than despair. "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman, I accept." Yates smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face. "Call me Yates. Now let me help you with that wagon. It's getting dark and we've got a bit of a ride ahead of us." As they set out from Moab, Katherine couldn't help but cast a glance back at the town that had rejected her. Perhaps this was a blessing in disguise. Perhaps with Yates Zimmerman, she would find not just employment but a new beginning. The journey to Yates's ranch took longer than expected. The wagon wheel had begun to wobble dangerously about 3 miles out of town, and they'd had to stop to secure it. By the time they arrived, night had fully descended, the vast Utah sky ablaze with stars. "It's not much," Yates said as they approached a modest but well-maintained homestead. A main house sat in the center, with several outbuildings scattered around it. A corral held a few horses, their shapes just visible in the darkness. "But it's home." He helped Katherine down from the wagon and led her to a small cabin set a little ways from the main house. "This is where you'll stay. Like I said, it's not fancy, but it's clean and dry." Katherine stepped inside as Yates lit a lamp. The cabin was indeed small but tidy, with a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, and a chest of drawers. A curtained-off area in the back presumably held a wash basin. "It's perfect," Katherine said softly, emotion thick in her voice. After weeks of uncertainty and rejection, the simple cabin felt like a palace. "I'll bring your things in," Yates said, ducking back outside. While he unloaded the wagon, Katherine explored her new home. The sheets on the bed were clean, if a bit worn, and there was a quilt folded at the foot. The chest of drawers contained a few basic supplies: a bar of soap, some candles, a small mirror. On the table sat a pitcher and a basin for washing. Yates returned with her trunk, setting it down by the bed. "I'll bring the rest in the morning," he said. "There's bread and cheese in the cupboard by the stove and fresh water in the pitcher. We can talk about your duties tomorrow after you've had a chance to rest." "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman Yates," Katherine corrected herself. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." Yates shook his head. "No need for that. I'm not being kind, I'm being practical. I need help and you need work. We're even." After he left, Katherine sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. Just that morning, she'd been facing destitution and despair. Now she had a roof over her head, the promise of wages, and a man who had looked at her and seen a person in need rather than a burden to be scorned. For the first time since Samuel's death, Katherine allowed herself to cry not tears of despair, but of relief and perhaps a tiny flicker of hope. Morning brought a clearer view of her new home. The cabin sat in a small clearing with a view of the main house about 50 yards away. Beyond that stretched the ranch proper, fields where cattle grazed, a stable and barn, and in the distance, the red rock formations that characterized this part of Utah Territory. Katherine dressed carefully in one of her few remaining dresses, a plain blue cotton that had seen better days but was clean and serviceable. She'd risen with the sun, determined to make a good impression on her first day. She found Yates in the kitchen of the main house, attempting to cook breakfast. The smell of burning bacon greeted her as she knocked tentatively on the open door. "Come in, Mrs. Montgomery," Yates called, waving her inside. "I'd offer you breakfast, but as you can smell, I'm not much of a cook." Katherine couldn't help but smile at the sight of the tall, capable-looking man flailing with a skillet of charred bacon. "Perhaps I could help with that." Relief washed over Yates's face. "Would you? That would be most appreciated." Katherine took over, salvaging what she could of the bacon and quickly whipping up some biscuits to go with it. As they ate, Yates outlined what he expected from her. "The house needs tending, of course, cleaning, cooking, laundry, but I also need help with the chickens and the vegetable garden. My last housekeeper, Mrs. Davis, handled all that and more. I can pay you $20 a month plus room and board." Katherine nearly choked on her biscuit. $20 was more than she'd expected, more than fair for the work described. "That's very generous, Yates," he shrugged. "It's what Mrs. Davis got. Fair's fair." After breakfast, Yates showed Katherine around the property. The ranch wasn't large by Utah standards, but it was substantial enough to support a modest herd of cattle and several horses. Besides the main house and Katherine's cabin, there was a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, currently only 2, brothers named Tom and Will Carter, as well as a barn, a chicken coop, and a small smokehouse. "The Carters handle most of the ranch work," Yates explained. "But they're gone a lot, driving cattle to the railroad station or hunting. That's why I need someone reliable at the house." Katherine nodded, already making mental notes of what needed attention. The kitchen garden was overgrown, the chicken coop needed cleaning, and judging by the state of Yates's shirt collar, laundry was well overdue. "I'll start today," she said decisively. "The garden first, I think, before it gets too hot." Yates smiled, a genuine expression that softened his weathered features. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, Mrs. Montgomery. I'll leave you to it." As he walked away, Katherine found herself watching him, noting the confident set of his shoulders, the easy grace of his stride. He was a handsome man, she realized with a start, and then immediately chastised herself for the thought. She was a widow of less than a month, and he was her employer. Such observations were inappropriate. But as she turned to the neglected garden, Katherine couldn't help but feel a small spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time, perhaps not since the early days with Samuel. It wasn't happiness exactly, but a precursor to it, a sense of possibility. The days at the Zimmerman ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. Katherine rose with the sun, prepared breakfast for herself and Yates, and occasionally the Carter brothers when they were around, then set about her duties. She cleaned the main house, tended the garden, looked after the chickens, prepared meals, and did laundry. It was hard work, especially in the heat, but Katherine found she didn't mind. There was satisfaction in seeing the immediate results of her labor: a clean house, a thriving garden, fresh eggs gathered from content chickens. Yates was a fair employer, never demanding more than she could reasonably accomplish and always expressing genuine appreciation for her efforts. He was gone much of the day, working with the cattle or mending fences or attending to the myriad tasks required to keep the ranch running. But they shared meals, and sometimes in the evenings, they would sit on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset and talking. Katherine learned that Yates had come to Utah Territory 10 years earlier, drawn by the promise of land and independence. He'd built the ranch from nothing, starting with just a few head of cattle and gradually expanding. He'd never married, he told her one evening, because he'd been too busy establishing himself. And now, Katherine had asked, then immediately regretted the personal nature of the question, but Yates hadn't seemed offended. "Now I wonder if I've been missing something important," he'd said thoughtfully, his blue eyes reflecting the fading light. "A home needs more than just walls and a roof to truly be a home." As August gave way to September, Katherine realized she'd been at the ranch for nearly a month. The initial shock of Samuel's death had faded into a more manageable grief, and while she still mourned him, she found herself increasingly engaged with her new life. She'd put on a bit of weight, which she attributed to regular, hearty meals after the lean times following Samuel's illness. But rather than feeling self-conscious about it, she found she didn't mind. Yates never commented on her size, never made her feel less than capable or worthy. One evening, as Katherine was hanging laundry on the line behind her cabin, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw Yates returning from town, a parcel strapped to his saddle. "Evening, Mrs. Montgomery," he called, dismounting. "Got something for you." Katherine wiped her hands on her apron, curious. "For me?" Yates untied the parcel and brought it over. "Ordered it from the mercantile in town. Thought you might like it." Katherine unwrapped the brown paper to find a beautiful blue calico fabric enough for a new dress. "Yates, I can't accept this." "Why not?" he asked, looking genuinely puzzled. "It's too much." "This isn't part of my wages." "Consider it a thank you," Yates said. "The ranch hasn't run this smoothly in years. And besides," he added, his eyes twinkling, "I thought the color would match your eyes." Katherine felt a blush rising to her cheeks, both at the compliment and at the realization that Yates had noticed the color of her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's beautiful." That night, as she lay in bed, Katherine found herself thinking about Yates far more than was appropriate. She liked him, his quiet strength, his fairness, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. But she was still a widow and he was her employer. Any attachment would be inappropriate, not to mention premature. Yet as she drifted off to sleep, it was Yates's face she saw, and the memory of his smile warmed her more effectively than the quilt covering her. The first real test of their growing friendship came in early October when Katherine fell ill. It wasn't serious, just a cold that left her congested and tired, but it meant she couldn't perform her duties for several days. To her surprise, Yates took it upon himself to care for her. He brought her soup, admittedly a bit too salty but made with obvious effort, made sure she had fresh water, and even read to her when she was too restless to sleep but too weak to get up. "You don't have to do this," Katherine protested weakly on the second day as Yates adjusted her pillows. "I'm sure you have more important things to attend to." "Nothing more important than making sure you get well," Yates said firmly. "The ranch can wait." It was during this time that Katherine realized how much Yates had come to mean to her and perhaps how much she meant to him. It wasn't just the care he showed her, but the way he looked at her when he thought she wouldn't notice, the gentle way he touched her forehead to check for fever, the relief in his eyes when her appetite returned. By the time Katherine was well enough to resume her duties, something had shifted between them. There was a new awareness, a tension that wasn't unpleasant but was definitely noticeable. They were more careful around each other, more conscious of casual touches, more deliberate in their conversations. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Yates turned to her with unusual seriousness. "Katherine," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I've been thinking a lot lately." Katherine's heart skipped a beat. "Oh, about what?" "About you," he said simply. "About how much you've come to mean to me, about how much I enjoy your company." Katherine felt a flush rising to her cheeks. "Yates, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I know it's too soon after your husband's passing. I know I'm just your employer, but I wanted you to know that to me, you're so much more than just my housekeeper." Katherine looked down at her hands, twisted together in her lap. "I've been having similar thoughts," she admitted softly. "But you're right, it is soon, and I worry about what people would think." Yates reached over and covered her hands with one of his. "What people?" "The townsfolk who turned you away. Why should their opinions matter to us?" "It's not just them," Katherine said, finally voicing a fear that had been growing within her. "Yates, look at me, I'm not the kind of woman men usually want, I'm too." "Stop," Yates said firmly, "don't say it." "Don't think it, Katherine, I see you, all of you, and everything I see I admire and respect and care for deeply." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Katherine found herself blinking back tears. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat in silence for a while, his hand still covering hers, watching as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear. "I'm not asking for anything right now," Yates finally said. "Just think about it, about the possibility of us, that's all I ask." Katherine nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As she walked back to her cabin that night, her mind was a whirl of conflicting emotions: grief for Samuel, guilt at the thought of moving on so quickly, fear of what others might think, and underneath it all, a growing affection for Yates that she could no longer deny. The weather turned cold in November, bringing the first snow to the ranch. Katherine had spent her sewing money from the past months on warm flannel for winter nightgowns, and had made good use of the blue calico Yates had given her, creating a new dress that she wore for the first time on Thanksgiving. Yates had invited the Carter brothers to join them for dinner, and Katherine had outdone herself, preparing a feast that had all three men groaning with satisfaction. After dinner, the Carters retired to the bunkhouse, leaving Katherine and Yates alone by the fire in the main house. "That was the best Thanksgiving meal I've ever had," Yates said, stretching his legs toward the fire. "You've made this house feel like a home again, Katherine," she smiled, pleased by the compliment. "I'm glad, I've enjoyed being here." Yates looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "Have you thought about what I said, about us?" Katherine nodded slowly. "I have, a great deal." And there was a hint of anxiety in his voice that touched her deeply. "And I think," Katherine said carefully, "that I would like to see where this might lead. But slowly, Yates, I still feel conflicted." Relief and joy spread across his face. "Slowly is fine, we have all the time in the world." That night marked a turning point in their relationship. They didn't speak of it again directly, but there was a new ease between them, a mutual understanding that they were moving toward something together, step by careful step. December brought more snow and the preparations for Christmas. Katherine decorated the main house with pine boughs and red ribbons, and Yates surprised her by bringing home a small pine tree, which they decorated together with paper stars and strings of cranberries. On Christmas Eve, after a simple but delicious dinner, Yates presented Katherine with a gift, a beautiful woolen shawl in a deep blue that matched her eyes. "It's lovely," she breathed, wrapping it around her shoulders. "There's something else," Yates said, suddenly looking nervous. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "This was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died, said I should give it to someone special." Katherine's heart hammered as she opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small pearl. "Yates, I'm not asking for marriage." "Not yet," he hastened to add, "but I am asking if you might consider it someday, if you might consider me as more than just your employer or your friend." Tears welled in Katherine's eyes. "I already do," she whispered. Yates's face lit up with joy. "May I kiss you, Katherine?" She nodded, and he leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened into something more certain, more passionate. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Katherine Montgomery," Yates said, his voice husky. "And I with you, Yates Zimmerman," she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. They spent the rest of the evening by the fire, talking softly, sharing occasional kisses, getting to know each other in this new way. It felt right, Katherine thought. Different from what she'd had with Samuel, but no less real, no less meaningful. The new year of 1880 brought changes to the ranch. With Katherine's encouragement, Yates expanded the vegetable garden and added more chickens. They discussed the possibility of selling eggs and vegetables in town come spring to supplement the ranch's income. Katherine herself began to venture into Moab occasionally, holding her head high as she made purchases at the general store or visited the dressmaker. The townsfolk were cool at first, but gradually, as they saw her transformation from desperate widow to confident ranch woman, their attitudes began to shift. "Mrs. Peterson asked after you today," Yates reported one evening in February, having just returned from town. "Said she noticed you were looking well," Katherine snorted. "Mrs. Peterson wouldn't give me the time of day when I needed help. Now she's interested in my well-being," Yates shrugged. "People change, or at least their perceptions do. You're different now, Katherine. Not just in how you look, but in how you carry yourself. You have purpose, confidence." Katherine considered this. It was true that she felt different, stronger, more sure of herself. And while she was still a large woman, she had come to accept her body more, to see it as a source of strength rather than shame. Yates's appreciation certainly helped with that. He never failed to tell her how beautiful he found her, how much he admired her curves, her softness. As winter slowly gave way to spring, Katherine and Yates's relationship deepened. They spent most evenings together now, either in the main house or in Katherine's cabin. They talked about everything, their pasts, their hopes for the future, their daily concerns and joys. And increasingly they spoke of a future together, not as employer and employee, but as husband and wife. In April, on a warm evening when the desert was beginning to bloom with wildflowers, Yates formally proposed. They were walking along the creek that ran through the property, hand in hand, when he suddenly stopped and turned to face her. "Katherine Montgomery," he said, taking both her hands in his, "these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You've brought joy and warmth and purpose to my days. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner in all things?" Katherine, who had been half expecting this moment for weeks, still found herself overcome with emotion. "Yes," she managed through happy tears. "Yes, Yates, I will marry you." He slipped his mother's ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that left them both breathless and laughing. They set the date for June, giving them time to prepare the ranch for what Yates insisted would be a proper celebration. The Carter brothers were openly delighted by the news, having grown fond of Katherine and her cooking. "About time, boss," Tom had said, clapping Yates on the shoulder. "She's a keeper, that one." News of their engagement spread quickly through Moab, generating a mixed response. Some, like the Petersons, who had once turned Katherine away, now sent congratulations and even a small gift. Others muttered about the impropriety of it all, a widow remarrying so soon, and to her employer no less. But Katherine found she didn't care. Her happiness with Yates was too profound, too real to be tarnished by gossip or judgment. The day of their wedding dawned clear and warm, a perfect June day in the Utah desert. Katherine wore a new dress of cream-colored cotton, adorned with lace she'd ordered specially from back east. Yates wore his best suit, his normally unruly hair slicked down for the occasion. The ceremony was held at the ranch, under a canopy of blue sky. A traveling minister performed the service, and the guests included not only the Carter brothers but also several of Yates's neighboring ranchers, and to Katherine's surprise, a few townspeople from Moab who had come to wish them well. "I, Yates, take thee, Katherine, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Yates said, his voice strong and sure as he gazed into her eyes. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Katherine repeated the vows, her heart so full she thought it might burst. As the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Yates leaned in to kiss her, she felt a sense of rightness, of completion that she had never expected to find again after Samuel's death. The celebration afterward was joyous, with food and drink and dancing that lasted well into the evening. As the last guests departed, Yates swept Katherine into his arms. "Mrs. Zimmerman," he said, his blue eyes twinkling. "Shall we retire?" Katherine laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I believe we shall, Mr. Zimmerman." That night, as they lay together in what was now their shared bedroom in the main house, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From desperate widow to beloved wife, from rejection to acceptance, from despair to joy, it had been a transformation beyond anything she could have imagined that dusty day in Moab when everything had seemed so hopeless. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, stroking her hair. "How fortunate I am," Katherine replied truthfully. "How unexpected and wonderful this all is." Yates pulled her closer. "I'm the fortunate one. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, Katherine Zimmerman." The years that followed brought many changes to the Zimmerman ranch. With Katherine's help, Yates expanded the operation, adding more cattle and developing a thriving business selling vegetables, eggs, and eventually, preserves and baked goods to the growing community of Moab. In the spring of 1881, Katherine gave birth to their first child, a son they named Joseph. 2 years later, a daughter, Elizabeth, joined the family. The children grew strong and healthy, thriving in the clean desert air and under the loving care of their parents. Katherine never regained the figure she'd had as a young woman, but she no longer minded. Her body had carried and nourished 2 children, worked alongside her husband to build a successful ranch, and gave and received pleasure in the privacy of their bedroom. It was a good body, a strong one, worthy of respect and love. Moab changed too, growing from a small, insular community to a bustling town with a proper school, a church, and even a small hospital. The Zimmermans were respected members of the community now, known for their generosity and hard work. Sometimes, when she was hanging laundry or gathering eggs or watching her children play in the yard, Katherine would remember that desperate day when she'd pushed her wagon out of town, facing an uncertain future. She would think about how one act of kindness, one person willing to see beyond appearances, had changed everything. And every night when Yates pulled her close and whispered, "I love you, Mrs. Zimmerman," she would think how fortunate she was to have found not just shelter and work, but a love that accepted and celebrated all of her, exactly as she was. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, their children playing nearby, Yates took Katherine's hand and pressed it to his lips. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Katherine looked at him, at the lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter, at the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair, at the love that still shone so clearly in his gaze, and shook her head. "Not one," she said, and kissed him as the last light of day painted the desert gold around them.